The French invaders.
Our guest in this episode of French Invaders is Eugyppus. We'll be discussing German politics, the demise of academia, as well as head girls and school moms.
Hello, Eugyppus and Pascal. We are very, very pleased today to have Eugyppus on the pod, and it's really an honor because I think it's definitely one of the most interesting Substack in the entire world, and I think Eugyppus occupies a very special place because he's one of the rare German actually to write about German domestic political life and all the burlesque creatures that intervene in German political life in English. So that is a particularly important Substack, and has been, as far as I'm concerned, an essential companion to go through the COVID ordeal, and so we are really pleased to have you on the pod. Just a couple of words, since you are not very well known in French circles. So Eugyppus writes the Substack, the Play Chronicle, where he, according to his own words and his presentation, he posts primarily on current affairs in Germany, as well as broader political and historical matters, various conspiracy theories, and the absurdities of modern academia. The blog was born as a running commentary on the COVID pandemic, but since then it has really diversified. I mean, right now, I would say most of it is about German internal politics, as well as a lot of coverage and focus lately about the United States. We'll come back to that, but maybe, Eugyppus, we will start about a question about the current situation in Germany after the implosion of the traffic light coalition. Can you explain to us what is happening here and what we can expect in the next few months?
Gladly, of course. First, I want to thank you for invitation to speak with you today. It's a great pleasure for me. So the Traffic Light Coalition was elected, the first post-Merkel government elected in 2021, right in the middle of the pandemic. And what happens there is there's the CDU does very poor. The Christian Democrats, our center-right party, does very poorly in that election. The Social Democrats, the SPD, come out on top. They end up their natural coalition partner are the Green Party, naturally the German Green Party, but they are Greens and SPD together don't quite have a majority, so they have to enter coalition. The only other party for a coalition is this liberal, market liberal, ordoliberal FDP, the Free Democrats. And so there's this three-part coalition, and the Free Democrats are kind of the odd one out. And they cause various political problems because, of course, being a market liberal party, the only reason you vote for them is not to pay more taxes. And all that the SPD, the Social Democrats, want to do is increase spending, and the Greens have various energy transition fantasies. So all that costs a lot of money. And they have this crude, sort of crazy financing scheme. They're going to reappropriate unspent COVID emergency funds so they can spend on all their projects, and they won't have to raise our debt brake, which is anchored in our constitution. That was the plan, and it was ruled unconstitutional by a court almost exactly 1 year ago. And from that moment, the Traffic Light Coalition was finished. Their whole raison d'être ceased to exist. There was no longer any rationale for the party because they couldn't fund any of their projects or anything like that. And so they sort of were a dead government walking for a whole year, and then finally the unpopularity spiral. They're the most hated government in really since the 1949 Republic was founded, since we have polls. It was too great, and it was especially destroying the Free Democrats. The voters have fled them in droves. I think the party has pretty much been, it's that chances are good it may have been permanently destroyed. It may end up becoming a regional West German party after this. There used to be a national party. They have been hurt very badly by the association with the traffic lights. So they finally ended up provoking their coalition partners into kicking them out of the government. So Scholz fired all of his cabinet ministers all of his FDP cabinet ministers some weeks ago, and that was the end of the traffic light coalition. We have now sort of a minority, sort of a de facto minority government of the Greens and the SPD until there's a confidence vote. So Chancellor Olaf Scholz will place the confidence vote on the 16th of December, I believe. And then there's the idea is there will be new elections at the end of February. So it's a very short overview.
Maybe one thing that I found particularly interesting. First of all, yes, the consequence of the Karlsruhe decision, which basically shows that what happens, and it's fairly similar than in France, is basically the traffic light coalition is running out of money. But they try to pass some kind of emergency economic package, which I understand would be some economic package motivated by the Ukrainian war, the war in Ukraine, which shows a staple of what you call hysterical politics. And I mean, you have even called that hysterical inertial politics, actually. And maybe you can tell us more about that emergency package that was attempted by the coalition.
Right. So the only way to get around the debt brake is to declare an emergency. That's why they wanted to reappropriate COVID emergency debt or credit authorizations, which Merkel had actually excised and then never used. Amazingly, 60 billion euros she had not spent. It's incredible. So they wanted to use those, but the court said you can't reappropriate emergency credit authorizations. That's illegal or unconstitutional. So then the next idea was they were going to use the Ukraine war and use that to declare an emergency to also escape the debt brake via this new emergency. That was what ultimately broke the coalition. Scholz demanded that his finance minister, who's also head of the Free Democrats, finance minister Christian Lindner, agree to this scheme to declare a new emergency on the basis of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This would allow them to then escape the debt brake anew, and that is when Lindner ended up getting sacked by Scholz because he refused to sign on to this scheme. Now, it's very legally doubtful that could work because, the Ukraine war has been going on for some years now, and they never declared an emergency when it happened. So courts are unlikely to look kindly upon this budgetary maneuver. And I believe Linda is essentially correct when he said he thought that this would not this would be struck down, and he sincerely believed it was anti-constitutional, so that's why he ended up leaving government. But you're absolutely right. It's an attempt to. It's sort of curious these government by emergency and the sort of submersion in a permanent state of emergency since 2020, which has never been lifted, and there's only the progression to new states and new kinds of emergencies. And it is very possible, if not probable, that the next government, when we have that after February, will also try to make an emergency out of the Ukraine war for budgetary purposes.
What's your take on what may happen if there are general elections in February? Who's going to win them? What kind of coalition may we see emerge?
Yeah, so right now, the party leading support is once again Christian Democrats. So it's a very normal-looking poll situation, except the Alternative für Deutschland, the opposition populist right party, is pretty strong now, 17 and 20%, somewhere in there. AfD is polling, but CDU is 32, 33%, so they're strong enough. They only need one partner, I think. It was a little bit unclear when the government fell apart or if this would work or if they would need two partners. I think right now everything stays the same. They'll only need one partner. And unfortunately, it's looking like it could be either Social Democrats or the Greens. I think I think it's likely, unfortunately, to be the Greens. I think I've been trying to point out to many people, there's been a lot of behind the scenes maneuvering, really reported on the back pages of newspapers, CDU adjacent newspapers like Frankfurter Allgemeine, now for some months about secret meetings between the Chancellor candidate Friedrich Merz and Green Party members. There's been a lot of sort of pre-discussions about possible coalition agreements with the Greens, how that might work. Merz has made a lot of calculated statements in public saying that, he's not really going to reverse all that many unpopular Green policies. There's even an internal resolution inside the CDU about how they are going to continue green environmental transition policies just in a sort of more market liberal way. So the ground has already been prepared for a coalition with the Greens. And right now, Merz is appearing in talk shows and so forth, saying very positive things about the coalition with them, and also attacking other politicians in a way that suggests he really does not want any kind of coalition with either the Free Democrats, or that also it would be unpreferred with the Social Democrats. So unfortunately, at the moment, it looks like we're going to have a black-green government with CDU on the one hand and Greens on the other, which is, I think, one of the worst possible combinations. But that's just me.
Yes, it's obviously not what the German people seem to be wanting.
No.
So, but in fact, it looks very much similar to the kind of attempt on the part of Macron to actually generate some kind of a Republican front coalition to exclude simply the Rassemblement National and the France Insoumise on the left. And I think we are seeing the same forces at play here. But it's again, I find is it possible in Germany now to imagine that there would be a government without the Greens in the coalition? I mean, I find that so mind blowing to have, like, I mean, the Greens, which basically are responsible for a massive, like, I mean, cock up in German economic policy, deindustrialization. On top of that, you had, like, I mean, the noise last week about Baerbock actually sermoning the Chinese in China, and the Chinese ending the conference without even a common press conference. So
Yes.
what are they? Why would the CDU conclude such a suicidal pact with the Green? That is something I cannot explain.
It's a really deep problem, and so I've thought about it. I was actually going to write a post about this today or tomorrow, so it's a really good question. Why can't you get rid of the Greens? Why do they keep coming back? And what is this mysterious force that keeps placing them at the center of German politics when
It's called slime.
when nobody really likes them? They sort of bounce around between 10 and 14% in the polls. They're sort of polling at a high right now because state media, public media is really pumping them up. They really want this to happen. So sort of constant every time you turn on television, there's another talk show and the Greens are being praised. And it's really quite, I find it embarrassing, actually. It's sort of impossible to watch, but there's a lot of work right now to make them strong enough so they can be good partners for the CDU. And I have three sort of theories, maybe two theories, see how I remember. One is that under Merkel for a long time, there was this strategy of asymmetric demobilization, which I talk about on my blog a lot. So Merkel basically preemptively adopted Green positions to try to deprive them of talking points and electoral advantages. And in doing this over years, her signature achievements end up being a lot of Green policies like nuclear phase-out, energy transition, and so forth, all inaugurated under Merkel. So she looks kind of like a black-green chancellor already. And as she does this, she basically created Alternative für Deutschland. The people began to bleed out of the CDU and into AfD because they didn't like CDU anymore. It was becoming some sort of green monstrosity, and so she created the AfD, but she also changed the nature of CDU. And I think a lot of people who are still in the CDU are sort of sympathetic to green policies as a result of this selection process and this filtering mechanism that happened over years. So I think especially the leadership of the CDU, the upper, more powerful figures like Merz, Eugyppus is another one. They're all very sort of sympathetic to the Greens, and this works for them in some way. And that is simply what the CDU is now. Is even if it hurts them electorally. So there's that. That we could go into. There's all kinds of triangulation, but that's one. Another thing that occurs to me about the Greens, and if you imagine a CDU Green government, it will be the most. I don't want to be impolite towards American friends, but it would be one of the most pathologically Atlanticist governments Germany's ever had. The Greens, they're on foreign policy, they're actually quite interventionist. They're whatever America wants to do, full speed ahead, and CDU is already like that, because that's what center-right politics looks like in Germany, in Europe more broadly, probably. And so you're looking at something, a government that's very, very favorable to American Atlanticist interests. And I think there are other forces, other institutional, monetary forces, perhaps even pushing in this direction for Germany, especially right now. So that's an alliance of convenience that makes sense to a lot of people on the inside of German politics. So that would be my other big theory. But it is really mysterious, because rationally, if you just want to win elections, the CDU should attempt another big coalition with these social democrats. That's what I think most people would prefer, according to polling. So they should try a social democrat coalition and get the Greens out of government. That would be the most logical thing. If they really wanted to change German politics and reverse the direction of things, they would enter a coalition with all of their former colleagues in the Alternative für Deutschland. But that's, beyond the pale. It's not possible in current German political culture.
You mentioned the AfD. I mean, what we're hearing is mainly it's far right, nationalist, but fair enough. Okay. But what is this party about?
Yeah, so I would say they are very similar to other sort of. I don't like calling them far right very much. I don't think that's really.
Yeah, not far right.
I mean, maybe from the perspective of a Green or a Linke party member, they're very far right. Yeah, I would say populist right, or there's even centrist elements. Of course they emerged. They were founded in 2014 as a sort of Eurosceptic party, and they were market liberals, a little bit more hardline than the Free Democrats. They weren't very remarkable, and then they simply, because of dissatisfaction with Merkel's policies, they got bigger and bigger over time, and filled up with I'd say there's two sort of main strains in the party right now. One is the dominant one, the leadership of the party, Alice Weidel and Tino Hrupala. They're both market liberal kind of politicians, and the leadership of AfD is pretty much market liberal as well. The sort of formal, what they call the Flügel around Björn Höcke in Thüringen is sort of considered a nationalist, hard right wing, but they're really sort of light nationalists. These sort of hysterical discussions of German politics always have to do with Nazi comparisons. I find them very exhausting. But in essence, it's sort of what we would call a Volkspartei a long time ago. That is, there's a lot of different sub-constituencies under the umbrella of the AfD, but the market liberal wing is dominant. There are populists. There are some nationalist strains in there, but I would say they're a populist European opposition party. That's it.
That's very interesting and very useful, because we hear very little, in fact, in the press in English and French, actually, about the AfD. All what we hear is that they were not even judged reputable enough to be in the same group as parties like Fidesz and the Rassemblement National,
yes.
Or a fortiori with Fratelli d'Italia, who are both in different groups. And so AfD created a new group after being excluded from the ID group in the European Parliament, called the Europe of Sovereign Nations, that include actually the representative from the Reconquête Party, the party of Eric Zemmour.
I did not know that. That's interesting. Okay.
That's interesting. Yes. So AfD, we really hear in the French press or in the French media or in the American media that basically, and including from the voice of people like of sympathizers of parties like the Rassemblement National that they are really neo-Nazis, and so that is particularly useful, and that you expand more about the AfD. And one question I have in particular about the AfD is do they have any Christian Democrat kind of ethos or component in the AfD, or is it really only a secular party? And a follow-up question on this is, does Christian democracy still mean anything in Germany?
That's a very good question. So the AfD is, I would say, pretty, of course, we have to remember it's full of a lot of former CDU members because of the whole Merkel era. So I wouldn't say that there's absolutely no space for Christian democracy in the party, or that nobody in the party has that kind of orientation. But no, it is pretty firmly secular despite all of that. And it always felt to me like a very pragmatic party with very simple, straightforward demands and light on ideology, and so it's very simple in that way. An expression of the fact that it's not really speaking to traditional Christian political concerns was an attempt early, was it last year, I believe now, to found another right-wing party out to the right of the CDU that would be called the Values Union, and that was sort of an interesting episode. So a former intelligence officer, Hans-Georg Maaßen, who tried to found this party, the Values Union, and it hasn't done very well. But the whole idea behind that party was there needed to also be a sort of not harder right, but more to not centrist, not flirting with the Greens, a sort of alternative for Christian people with Christian democratic convictions on the right side of the German political spectrum. So that hasn't really worked, but there is this sentiment out there, and I definitely know some Germans who are interested in a party like that. So perhaps that will come. I think it's only healthy that there's more differentiation among opposition parties. I think it also makes it harder for state authorities to repress them or ban them if there's more than one party, and it can cause interesting ecosystems and so forth. So I'm not one of these people that says, if they or nothing, you always have to vote for this one party. I think it's sort of healthy to have an emerging party system beyond the establishment parties. But that's sort of a side note. As for Christian democracy, it's very attenuated now. I think it was already it's been in decline really since probably the 80s is when I would say there was a big inflection point. With Helmut Kohl and the embrace of market liberal principles, same era as Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Germany tried to get on this bandwagon as well, and that was. That's when things start to seem a little bit different with Christian democracy. And I would say the federal party now is really just, they are, it's very hard to work out what they are ideologically, aside from a sort of carefully triangulated, a series of political arrangements in the middle somewhere of the spectrum, allowing us just to have just enough green policies that don't burn down the economy, but that keep the journalists satisfied or something. The one place you might say there is still some sort of Christian democratic sentiment is in Bavaria, where I come from, because there's an interesting different political landscape there. The Christian Democrats don't exist. They have their sister party, the Christian Social Union, is in charge of is the dominant party in Bavaria. They enter coalitions at the federal level with the CDU, and the CSU is markedly more conservative and retains a lot of older Christian Democrat elements from you might see from my parents' generation to 20, 30 years ago. So that's one place where it lives a little bit, but I think the CSU is also on the same developmental track as the CDU in the longer term.
Still on the to stay in the discussion about the AfD and then transition toward another important aspect of your work. I think one of your most widely read essays was an essay from February this year entitled "Germany Announces Wide-Ranging Plans to Restrict the Speech, Travel and Economic Activity of Political Dissidents in order to better control the thought and speech patterns of its own people." And in this article, you are developing a very interesting thesis around the attempt to actually to exclude, to actually prohibit the AfD, and in it, and you took actually a lot of heat for that article from some of your readers, because you said that, it was a more meaningful comparison to view latter-day Germany as a recreation of the DDR, as opposed to a fall of Germany into some kind of fascist authoritarianism. Maybe you can expand on this.
Yes, of course. So I have a very specific understanding of what is fascism in general. I've written long posts about this. So aspects of German history interest me, and I think fascism is a very historically bounded phenomenon. It doesn't really, it's specific to its era, and that had to do with the post-World War I period and all kinds of political and cultural forces coming together. And that what people really mean, especially I think many Americans really mean when they talk about fascism, is really talking about authoritarianism. And that is, for me, a tactic and not a political ideology. I think we've learned that even Western liberal democratic systems can become incredibly authoritarian, as paradoxical as that sounds. We saw that during the entire pandemic. And so as soon as there's an authoritarian manifestation of some kind or other, I don't like running around calling it fascist. I think that strikes me as a little bit American and also just too imprecise, and I've become much more interested in comparisons to the DDR, the German Democratic Republic, the Communist East Germany, because there you see a lot of the same sort of tendencies re-emerging. And it's sort of like they're reinventing a kind of communist. They're not communists, of course, but they're reinventing a kind of sort of leftist authoritarian system, responding to similar pressures. And so the thing that most interested me about a lot of this radicalization of the German political enforcement mechanisms and domestic intelligence agents was their seeming reappropriation of old laws from the DDR, old laws from the criminal code of the DDR, criminalizing people who mock or make fun of the state. And that used to be a whole criminal offense in the DDR. You could go to prison for it. And our current domestic intelligence, who are in charge of political enforcement, so if they determine you are unconstitutional or you're perhaps saying things that are a little bit too far right or far left, they'll place you under surveillance, and this is done very widely. The chances that I'm under surveillance, for example, are very high. One of the new criteria of political, not crime, but sort of pre-crime or political offense that they conceived of was the mockery of the state. And they did this administratively. This is not a law they passed. It's not illegal. You can still do this. You'll just get investigated by the political, investigated by the political intelligence services. But they seem to have, in coming up with this, describing this crime, they seem to have actually borrowed, wittingly or unwittingly, vocabulary from the old DDR criminal code that interested me a lot. And I think in general, a lot of the tendencies we're seeing now is a lot of the tendencies that made the DDR what it was. They are the general failure of an economic system, the attempt to crack down on the populace and prevent expressions of discontent against dogmatically imposed policies. It seems there are interesting parallels here. Much different from fascism, which is a phenomenon of the wars and was dealing with the threat of communism, and was also authoritarian, of course, but in response to different stimuli and had a different character.
Mm-hmm. And what's your take on what's going on in the US currently?
Going on in the US just in general?
The political situation right now with Trump, and then of course a question coming right after that: what's going on also in Syria?
Oh yeah, Syria is hard. But the US is, well, I think it's just important for me not to exaggerate too much the importance of Trump's victory. I was happy he won. I generally support the victory of populist politicians in any country, because I think we are looking at a really failed and sclerotic international post-war liberal system that is increasingly not functional and not delivering what it promises, and has created an out-of-touch, oblivious increasingly destructive elite. This is all very terrible. And so, of course, I support populist politics. And I thought I was happy that Trump won, and it felt good, man. But I have to say that I'm not, I hope that he fulfills all his promises. I don't want to be a doomer or a black pillar or anything. But I think it's important to set reasonable expectations. We're dealing with just the United States is an incredibly powerful, very elaborate bureaucratic system, and whether a man and his appointees, however determined they are, can significantly change it. What kind of defense mechanisms it will deploy against them, we're not sure yet. And so I just want to be reasonable about the expectations there. But I think it's also important, and there's perhaps a lesson to be learned from the fact that Trump is. That the first real populist breakthrough in the West happened at the center of the empire in the United States. That, for me, suggests perhaps that they are at the leading edge of this political development, and we will perhaps also see other similar developments in continental Europe as well, which I hope happens. Another footnote I would add is that I think one should take Trump very seriously when he says America first, and that a lot of his policies are perhaps not going to be so great for Europe and for the continent in particular. And that's perhaps in some ways unfortunate. But just to be clear-eyed about who Trump is, he's not going to solve all of our problems. Yes. Mm-hmm. Or about Syria also. I don't have deep thoughts about Syria. It's pretty clear that the last 2 months of the Joe Biden administration are just an attempt to escalate everything, push everything through as hard as they can. They are trying to revive the proxy war in Syria. They raised the limits on the long-range missiles to attack the Storm Shadow and the Storm Shadow and the ATACMS missiles. Yes, yeah, I can't have the weird name. There is the distance limits, so they're now able to target inside Russia. So they are obviously escalating on all fronts against Russia before Trump can take office. And exactly what motivation is here, I'm not sure. It is, I think, significant that these cruise missile strikes stopped after Russia responded with their Oreshnik intermediate range ballistic missile with that implied threat of nuclear counterstrike, that there haven't been any further cruise missile attacks. So perhaps the West has backed off and decided to try to lean on Syria as much as possible now, also using somewhat their proxies, Turkey and so forth. But I don't know.
Since we are on the topic of the United States, one of your funniest article was about the Trump derangement syndrome after the re-election of Trump this year in Germany, and you wrote that the Spiegel was in fact running a story about a behavioral therapist who was advising her clients about how to deal with the mental health consequence of Trump's victory. Do you really see a huge panic in your circle in Germany, or is it really something real?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So it's not at all like 2016. So I was also here for 2016, and there was seriously the German press. I don't. At the time, I was living in Italy. Actually, I was back and forth between Germany, and so I remember the Italian press didn't seem to be as freaked out, but the German press was absolutely rabid about Trump's election, and a lot of Germans were personally worried and speaking about American fascism and just really deranged stuff. And this time there's still some I don't know exactly how to describe this emotion, political anger or frustration or something, but it's much more muted this time. And there also seems to be an effort on the part of the press, especially to keep the coverage restrained. And not like I had another post where I went back and looked at all the old articles about Trump from 2016, 2017, with the really crazy stuff. They have the Spiegel especially had this artist, and he was this totally deranged guy. He would always paint Trump beheading somebody or Trump dressed up as a Ku Klux Klan officer hanging somebody, or just really insane stuff. And that's now all gone. That's not present in German media. There's definitely an effort to be restrained, and one could speculate about causes for this. I think perhaps there's some retrospective embarrassment about their excessive emotion and panic the first time around, and a conscious effort by management and within news services to keep things under control.
Well, I can tell you it's also like that here in the United States. It's like, we have seen some really hysterical kind of like, commentaries about, in fact, the worst hysteria was a few weeks before the election, when suddenly we had that whole comparison of between Trump and Hitler. But since then, it's very muted actually. And even, I live in Washington DC, which is libertad central, and I can tell you it's people don't want to talk about it, and have seem to be having got all their wits against the fact about the fact that
unfortunately not in France. We're still at it.
So that's interesting. To remain on the topic of the US, you have done something particularly interesting during the campaign. You have run a full transcript of the Tim Walz debate with J.D. Vance, and then the Kamala Harris interview with Bret Baier on Fox News. You were like, I thought it was a genius idea on your part to do that, because a lot came out. I watched these two the debate and this interview, and to see the transcript like that with your commentary was absolutely fascinating. So what did you think so fascinating about these two politicians that you felt compared to do that, and particularly about Walz?
Yes, so Tim Walz. So that's why I really had the idea. And once I had that post, and everyone wanted me to do a same post on Kamala Harris, and I tried to find a good opportunity for it. But Tim Walz, I didn't really, so I'd never heard of him before. When he first sort of appeared, I watched a few interviews with him on YouTube, and I thought he just seems like a really strange man. It's almost like not real or something. And he very strange mannerisms. His moves, his hands weird. The way his lips move when he speaks are sort of strange. And I thought it's just odd. And then I listened to the debate, and it just seemed so crazy to me. And what was frustrating is then I read German coverage of the debate, and it was all about how Tim Walz had absolutely just shown up J.D. Vance, and he had completely won and dominated the weird Republican vice presidential candidate and all this stuff. I thought, man, I feel like I'm losing my mind, because I saw a totally different debate, and I became very fascinated by it and ended up writing this post, because if you look at what Tim Walz actually says, most of the time it doesn't make any sense at all. He seems to be making sense, but the points he's making are sort of free association. It's very strange. He has some sort of, I don't know, cognitive issues. Maybe I don't know what causes this, but it's very strange. And I noticed all these weird sort of verbal problems he has. So someone will mention a word, and then he'll just keep repeating that word in different contexts in subsequent sentences while he speaks. Not all this made it into the post. I had to be economical and choose things that were exemplary, but I thought he's just a very fascinating figure. And my thesis is that he's, most politicians are kind of playing the role of statesmen these days. They're ceded a lot of their powers to bureaucratic managerial structures, and they don't really run things themselves. They just pretend to on television. And that Tim Walz is kind of like a degraded photocopy of the political actor. So he's not even pretending to be a politician. He's sort of aping the roles of the actors he's seen. And this is why he's such a sort of low resolution, almost artificial intelligence inspired kind of personality. But that amused me a lot. That was very funny.
Okay. So, Eugyppus, clearly, I mean, your Substack is called a Journal of Plague. So that was like, and in fact, I think you started it in July 2021, if I'm correct.
Yeah, around then, yes.
Yes, it's so you started this as a very bright commentary on the Corona crisis, and which was, again, I mean, I think you were in the center of the most burlesque COVID policies with a certain amount of particularly grotesque characters, yes. Like Karl Lauterbach, whom you call Lautertard. So what is, like, I mean, you have even coined a concept, the concept of pandemicism. And if I understand correctly, you are writing a book about pandemicism. So maybe you can tell us what you mean by pandemicism.
Yeah, so the book, actually, I think they are working well. Their German translation is I wrote in English, so the German translation is in process right now, and I want to sort of time the English to come out at the same time. And I had planned to do it earlier, but I think it's been good to wait. Actually, there's more things have happened and so forth. It's also good to have some distance because it was so intense. But the pandemicism is sort of my term for what I call it a proto-ideological system, which is the idea that pandemics exist and that they can be mitigated or prevented by technocratic interventions. There's neither of those two things. Pandemics are social constructs. We decide they exist, and there's really no empirical evidence that anything we can do can stop them. We've never stopped any pandemic before doing anything. So this is an ideological construct that's sort of in tension with reality. So pandemicism is both the term I use for this idea, and it's then also the term I apply to all of the academic, bureaucratic, managerial structures which depend on this, which arise from the social relationships, also which arise from this basic ideological understanding. And so my basic thesis is that what happened is there since the later 20th century, in response to influenza pandemics and smallpox eradication, there emerged this pandemicist ideology inside all of our public health departments, and they were all kind of how do you say, they were sort of like sleeper agents sitting there, and they never really had a chance to do anything, but they were wargaming and planning for how to handle the next pandemic, and they were really excited about this. And there are a few pandemics almost happened but didn't quite. The big one was the 2009 swine flu, right? Where they really tried to get the panic up and running, but it didn't work, and then it stopped. But then so you see this thing trying to happen before it actually does, and really sign that there's a lot of bureaucratic momentum building up, a lot of interest in this thing because people's careers depend on it. And then 2020 was just the year when there was a plausible pathogen. It all broke out into the open. So that's roughly my thesis of pandemicism and how it works.
What in particular do you think was so central? First of all, maybe you can explain to us your mental process when you started to write that Substack. I mean, I've talked with a few friends actually. Like, Ernest Lyons, I know he was trying to exercise, working for the Blob in Washington DC. So it was I perfectly understand that. The COVID was such a unique event in life. But what was also what is so central for you of the COVID as a revelatory moment of much deeper realities? Yeah.
So I really started to think about COVID. There's a period. So I admit I was initially sort of, I didn't think too critically about it. I originally just sort of accepted, okay, there's a virus, we have to stay home. Then by May, a lot didn't really make sense to me. I thought these policies are kind of irrational. The one point where I really realized there was something wrong was when they roped off all the outside playgrounds, right? Children couldn't play outside. But then they opened all of the hair salons because politicians wanted to get their hair done for the television appearances. Then you sort of realize there's something really kind of out of place here. Then when we had almost no cases in the summer, but still all these restrictions. It didn't make any sense. You sort of begin to think about the logic of the policies, then it all comes apart in your head. I realized how gullible I had been at the beginning. But what really got me thinking about what caused Corona and the entire panic around COVID was so I was technically a bureaucrat for the Free State of Bavaria at the time. I was a researcher, but I had a bureaucratic position, so I was sort of enmeshed in the Bavarian government. Technically speaking, I didn't have any responsibilities. I do research. I study ancient stones and things, but so I got to see how my own institute and the broader sort of managerial structure responded to this, and I realized one of the most salient things about COVID and the pandemic was how a lot of sort of middle management nobodies you'd never pay attention to before were now suddenly in charge of everything. So, our secretaries who just sent our mail were now suddenly putting down little tape on the floor telling you where you could walk in the hallway. And I remember I refused. I was so tired. I had a little teeny apartment in Munich, I wanted to go to work and I was tired of being stuck at home. And then, I don't have any of the big library or anything. So I just went back to my office. I'm a German bureaucrat, fairly powerful. I can just go in where I want, and they let me in. And I started working again, and then the secretaries came after me, and they had like a whole secret personnel meeting about how I was to be punished for this. And I really realized my entire institute had been kind of hijacked by these kind of managerial types, and I began to conceive of the pandemic really as kind of a bureaucratic coup, a kind of coup of the managers and the people who run things. They had sort of seized control of large parts of our government and our bureaucracy, and that was really what the purpose of COVID was. And that was sort of how I began to think about the bureaucratic forces driving the pandemic, and also why it persisted for so long.
You have written there was a particularly interesting series of essays on your Substack called the Pandemic Impressions. I think it was a 4-part series, and in it you are saying that in fact, the authorities really overplayed their hand, and that's what I understand. And they really, and all this had some kind of unintended effect from them, which I think is the characteristic of our elites. They have no sense of what the consequences of their action are. It's and so in it I would like you to tell us a little bit more about how that these unintended consequence created what you call a great opt-out. So yeah, that's like to hear you on this.
A great what? It's created
a great opt-out.
Yeah, of course. So the what to say? I think the system, the pandemic system was itself kind of self-radicalizing, because it depended upon, so when the decision was made to lock down or vaccinate everybody, it depended a lot on convincing the people that this was necessary. And there was a lot of high-level anxiety. We've had now leaks and all kinds of information, high-level anxiety that they wouldn't be able to get the people to go along with lockdowns and so forth. And it depended on sort of scaring the people about this great scary virus, creating a lot of virus panic propaganda, which then had a feedback effect because people took it seriously, were very afraid of the virus, and then there emerged political demand for more lockdowns and so forth. This was a self-reinforcing system that rapidly spun out of control. So the architects of lockdowns, and even a similar thing happened with vaccination in late 2020 and 2021. The system rapidly spun out of control, and nobody could control it anymore. And it was a self-reinforcing feedback loop. And some of the most interesting sources for this, to look inside government and see how it's happening, are these Matt Hancock text leaks, which came out a few years ago. So his WhatsApp leaks with different members of the British cabinet, where they're you see how they are alternately feeding the propaganda and trying to scare people to stay home and then feel absolutely powerless in the face of massive public pressure and panic about the virus. And it's just very, very interesting and astounding. It's also in these documents where they admit that masking is for symbolic reasons, for showing that the state is doing something and so forth. Very, very fascinating texts. But so it ended up being lockdowns, the whole pandemic policy ended up becoming an end into itself, which could never extinguish the virus, and which ended up in the end cannibalizing its own support, because it's also very interesting to read about. Just read the Twitter comments to posts by somebody like Karl Lauterbach, how the pandemic sort of fizzled out was every time he would demand more measures or something, literally everybody in his comments and his mentions on Twitter would be attacking him. There would be all of us attacking him for, you need to let us go outside again, you're a complete crazy person. But then all the people on his side would be blaming him for not having eradicated the virus yet. And it became a totally losing thing politically, which is how the pandemic actually came apart politically in the end, I think, was there's no more way to win it, and it was just grinding politicians into dust. But what can you say? They absolutely overplayed their hand, but all the bureaucratic structures that caused that are still there, and the pandemicists themselves are, if anything, better funded. Now this is a thing that people expect to happen, and so I think it's a real, I don't know, it's a problem for the future, not for the next 5 years, but maybe in 10 years, it's conceivable that try it all over again,
There seems in Germany, though, to be a much more vivid debate about what has been going on during the COVID, about vaccines, etc., than there is elsewhere in Europe and especially in France. Is that real? What's going on?
In Germany, you mean? There's.
Yeah, in Germany, yes.
Yes, so there's. I would say that some of the most open debates has been in United States, actually, for I think their political structures are different. But here, I think what happened is there was just such a, I don't want to use bad language, but what happened was truly stupid. It was really extreme. It lasted for a long time, and it's just so painfully obvious to so many people that all of that ranting about unvaccinated people really, not quite genocidal, but things that were really made me personally uncomfortable. Like the rhetoric of our politicians in 2021, 2022 was so unhinged, so irresponsible. It's hard to describe. We had some of the dumbest, most extreme COVID policies in the world here in Germany. And I think that there's just naturally a growing cultural dissatisfaction with that. At the same time, our press is very, very controlled, not centrally controlled, but it's not open to just repeating any critiques of government ministers and so forth. They're handled very carefully. So a lot of this stuff still remains in peripheral media, in alternative media, but I would say that it's definitely more likely than not that any German you speak to on the street thinks that some undefined but very large part of pandemic policy was a very bad idea. So that's at least good. Also, it's amusing to see a lot of our former pandemicist politicians denying and fleeing from their prior radical positions. So you have the horrible virologist, this man who's just, he belongs in prison, according to me, Christian Drosten, who's demanding child vaccination, who's demanding school closures, never met a lockdown he didn't like. Now, every time he appears in public, which is increasingly rare, he denies having done all of these things. It's really astounding, but also, I think, a sign of how hard they lost in the end,
You use the word that comes back very often in your Substack, which is the word stupid. And you took, in fact, that's where you take a lot of heat, usually from your readers, is precisely when you are asserting that, in fact, it is stupidity of our elite, that we live in some kind of idiocracy, and that the most stupid element of our society are precisely supposed to be the best and brightest, and that that it's their stupidity that runs the show more than Bill Gates fantasized Machiavellian genius, or whatever Bill Gates conspiracies, and or Elon Musk. So that's maybe you can tell us more. And why do you think it generates so much controversy when you formulate such an explanation?
Yeah, of course. I think we are governed by very unnatural political systems. There's not. It's hard to describe the nature and extent of modern managerial government in the West. To get some idea of it, you can just take any policy you like, how small, big, obnoxious, you like it maybe, you hate it, and try to trace it back to its origins. That is how it was, who came up with that idea, how it was voted on, how it's enforced locally, and count all the people involved, they're all decision makers, they all somehow determine how policy works on the ground. There's thousands of them, even for minor meaningless things like parking regulations. It's really crazy, to say nothing of big policies like pandemic lockdowns or vaccine coercion or anything like that. So we're just governed by very complex systems, and this relatively new. It's happened. It relates to the emergence of mass society in the late stages of industrialization, but the true extent of managerial bureaucracy didn't really blow up hugely until the post-war period. So it's a relatively new phenomenon. Our political understandings haven't kept up with this. What's happened? We still have very antiquated, sort of trite, child book level understandings of how government functions, where you elect a parliament and they put someone in charge and they pass laws. That's all very kind of outmoded now, and our cultural understandings haven't caught up. The idea that there's somebody in charge doing something for a strategic purpose, he's trying to achieve something in the world, that's an old style, pre-managerial government kind of politics. And people are still, that's a simpler model as well, easier to understand. And so people see our massive bureaucratic systems malfunctioning or doing weird stuff or irrational things all the time. And they try to reimpose this old political logic on it. They say, well, there must then be a hidden force or a conspiracy, that the real people in charge must be pursuing this or that agenda just off stage or towards hidden ends we can't understand. And they try to sort of reimpose a logic according to the old politics that we understood from the 19th century on the actions of our states, when in truth we have totally different new systems. And so I call them stupid because these are machines made of human parts, and they don't really, so the people in them, the individuals inside these governmental systems, may be perfectly intelligent. I don't think that we're governed by geniuses, but they're a little bit above average, say. Somebody like Robert Habeck or Emmanuel Macron or something. They are not stupid people by any means, but they're not, I don't know, physicists either. It doesn't really matter how smart they are, because everything they do is modulated via institutions. And so they get the institutions to act in the it's a little bit complex, it's a little subtle. So imagine you're an institution, I don't know, you're in charge of parking enforcement or whatever in your city, and you have some mid-level managerial position. And how do you get that institution to act, or what do you advocate for? Well, you do things that will benefit your own position in that institution. So you don't really care about, it's very secondary to you about whether parking works correctly in your city or not. And it's also secondary about whether your parking authority is well regarded, or whether your officers on the street are well regarded. You try to act within that institution to enhance your position, to achieve promotion and so forth. And when you're given control over the institution in the broader world, you get it to act in ways that increases your prominence and authority and position inside that institution. So institutions act in the outer world for ends that largely serve internal motivations of the actors inside of them. Usually this is all about expanding institutions, getting more people involved, expanding the jurisdiction, expanding their funding and so forth, their social prominence. So to say that the actions of the state are stupid, I mean that they're institutionally mediated in this way, and they are increasingly irrational. And I just think it's an intellectual mistake to try to reimpose traditional political models and traditional political theses, motivational theses on what the state does. In truth, almost most of state actions right now, all of our countries, most of what they do doesn't make any sense. And we've never seen countries do these things before. Things like the energy transition or COVID lockdowns or mass migration. These are all things that countries started doing within 20 years, and they're crazy. And they're a different kind of policy that doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's how I try to explain them.
Maybe since we are entering into the topic of like the stupidity and the kind of like the hysterical aspect of our elite, maybe we can this time enter the temple of stupidity, which you have frequented the halls very much, which is the academia. You have written extensively about the academia. I think you are one of the best witness of what is contemporary academia, both actually in the United States and in Germany, and what you have written about the academia, including in your letter when you left. Actually, the academia is absolutely fascinating. So, what can you tell us about? Precisely what you have. What's your theory about how that your epistemological theory about that community of scientists, which creates which becoming more massive since the post-war, has precisely led to the kind of idiocracy that are today our universities everywhere in the world, but including, of course, in the United States and in Germany.
Yes, so I noticed this really. So it's something you don't quite know. So I've been professor and academic for many years. I work in both Germany and the United States. I ended my career in Germany, and now I blog full time. But I was a professor in the United States, and one thing I noticed is that fields of inquiry, don't really seem to be advancing anymore. They are, at least in my field, so I can't speak for all fields. Perhaps there are some that are really making huge breakthroughs. I think some parts of the hard sciences are still functional, but I'm sort of, ancient historian, philologist. And I realized that in my field and in adjacent fields that I know about, there hasn't really been major advances for a very long time. And I started thinking about why this is. And one of the things I noticed is that there's not that people don't discover new things. Because I had a friend that told me, he said, it's really because we picked all the low-hanging fruit, and so we're slowing down and we're not making new discoveries. But then when I returned to Germany to research full time, I edited a journal, and I had a much more intensive confrontation with research production, and I was reading hundreds of articles a month, multiple journals. That was part of my job, was to keep up with all the literature in my field. And I'd never read so widely before. And I realized there are discoveries out there. They just don't get incorporated into the literature. They're kind of ignored. And also I realized that most things that are published in my field are completely worthless. It's unbelievable. There are entire journals that haven't published a single interesting article. And I mean this objectively. I have sort of good criteria. An article should discover something that hasn't been noticed before. It should get cited by another journal, at least, but it should get cited by other publications in service of some sort of empirical point or something. There's whole journals out there that just publish things just to publish them for no reason at all. And the reason is that academia has filled up with thousands of people, many more people. I'm not sure exactly how it is in France, but in America for sure, and also in Germany, more and more people are going to university than ever before. They have to have professors and docents and all kinds of people to look after them and teach them stuff. And so academia gets bigger, and all these people have to publish to demonstrate their academic credentials, and the journals fill up with a lot of worthless crap. The fields are just expanded. The mass and scale of the academic project has exceeded bounds within which research is possible. And there's actually research on this. I found a paper where they had looked at various measures of progress in different fields and found that the larger they get, the more people you involve in a field of academic inquiry, the slower progress becomes. So there's like an optimal point. Obviously, if only one person's working in a field, then also you have no progress. But as fields get very large and very big, they begin to slow down because there's too much disparate research to incorporate. Real findings don't get noticed; they're drowned out by all the noise. It's very hard to generate consensus systems when there's thousands of scholars across the globe writing on the same thing. And it's very clear that our academic institutions have become fundamentally dysfunctional in this way. And this is in addition to all the other crazy stuff. So of course there's all the political crazy, and there's the head girls and all the mismanagement. And America especially has just the administrative apparatus of American universities has gotten as large or larger than the faculty at many of these schools. So you have more people managing the school than you have people teaching. It's really crazy. It's pathological in many ways, but those are roughly my ideas about academia.
Well, I can reassure you it's like that in so many departments, not only in philology. I mean, I was a lawyer actually, and so that's I've observed the same phenomenon as well. And you were starting to get into a topic which is a constant in your work, which is the kind of coup that was orchestrated that transfers like the power to administrators over the faculty, and we have seen that the bureaucracy has been the main engine of promotion of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, aka wokeness, in American academia, and so I think I saw a figure that in the increase of the bureaucracy in American academia is has been for 3 decades about 1600%, something like that. It is absolutely mesmerizing the amount of bureaucrats in academia in the US. But yes, you were mentioning that internal coup, and you have a whole bestiary in your work of figures, and you mentioned one in particular, the head girls. Can you tell us more first about, maybe the develop more about the massive spread about bureaucracy, and is it to the same extent in Germany as the US, and the importance in that unfolding drama of the head girls?
Yes, so I should clarify, the head girls is a concept I did not develop. The man who invented it is his name is escaping me right now, but he's an influence of mine. He had also a blog 20 years ago or so, and he also wrote about various pathologies in academia. And I discovered his work only after I'd made very similar observations. And I used to call head girls something different, but I adopted his term because it was better. So head girls they're attractive, they are often athletic, they are smart, but not really smart. They are very social, and they're not always girls, but they're usually girls. So overwhelmingly women, but they're men who fit this archetype as well. They're very social. They want to get along. They want to work as a team together to accomplish things. They really like meetings, and they are very common in managerial positions. And increasingly, they are taking over academia. And so I always say that, of course, these are very pro-social people and they have a role to play in any institution, but you have to have a balance of types, and you can't have all head girls all the time. And what's happened to especially American institutions is they've been overrun by these people. So I remember at university, the amount of time you spend in meetings and committee meetings and talking about stuff is just outrageous. It's just so much of the job. You're sitting and there's no reason for this. I remember half the meetings, more than half, 80-90% of the time you're talking with these people, you realize these are just social events where they get together and talk with each other, and you're not really deciding anything. It's just so much time. And it's because the head girls like to get together and talk about things. It's also because they like to feel busy and they like to be working. It's very contrary to how academic research, according to me, happens, which is you sit in rooms by yourself, you read difficult books, and you try really hard, you smoke cigarettes, you try really hard to figure out a problem. And that's not what these women do at all. They are engaged in rituals of social consensus and everything else. And so the more head girls you have, the less you can get done. But the more busy you become, because they love work and they love multiplying work. And that's when I really realized that I had to get out of there sometime, because otherwise, I don't want to be 70, 80 years old and sitting in committee meetings and dying after a whole career of that. Sounds terrible. But the head girls, this is a very fundamental aspect of American university culture. They're also very much on the rise in Germany. We are a little behind. It's not quite as bad there. But head girls are above all very bad because they are highly agreeable. And I think it's very important for academic discoveries, for insights, for literature, for all kinds of human intellectual production to be disagreeable, to disagree with other people, to have original ideas and to value original insights. And the head girls, they just drown out these fundamental, very valuable human impulses towards originality and disagreeableness and intellectual rebellion. And you don't want, again, it's about balances. You don't want an entire department or an entire university to consist of nothing but rebellious, obnoxious, disagreeable, crotchety old men either. That's terrible. You could never run anything. But we've had the opposite extreme with, I think, very, very serious consequences for cultural and intellectual achievement.
No, I think the head girls thing is a very interesting. You have also other figures in your work. Like, I mean, you are, for example, I thought it was very interesting that you were saying that particularly the Green Party now in Germany is becoming a party which is not cool anymore because it's populated by school moms. That's another
yes.
of your
school moms. Another
yes.
type. Yes. They're different from the head girls. They have different roles.
So how do you distinguish? I mean, what has happened to the Green Party to become so uncool and that's like so as to be a school mom party?
Yeah, it's a very important cultural development. It's also related to the fact, sort of unexpected, that Alternative für Deutschland has a sort of cultural energy about it. It's cool. Not children, but teenagers think it's cool. They do really well on social media, and this is surprised even the AfD themselves. If you listen to or talk to their politicians, this sort of took them by surprise in the last 5 years or so. But it's kind of subversive to be on the right and on the right with air quotation marks. It's sort of it's subversive. You're not supposed to like them. It's countercultural in a way, and youth like that. But this is where the Greens used to be in the 70s, or really in the 80s in Germany. They had the ripped jeans, and they were out there at the anti-nuclear protests, and they were part of a whole countercultural leftist movement that existed across Europe in different forms. And they were super cool, and they had this youthful energy, and they grew up. They became victims of their own success. They all entered the establishment. And what they did, especially in Germany, was they all entered the schools. So school teachers and journalists are the two areas where Greens are just crawling the walls. They are just, Greenism is just overwhelming. And if you talk to like a teenager about his assignments at Gymnasium or something, it's just incredible what they have to do. They're writing essays about how carbon dioxide is going to melt the planet in 5 years. And it's really, these are like loony bins. The Greens have turned these schools into just insane asylums. And of course, children react to that with, the school mom. The school mom ideology is not cool, right? It's something people are always nagging you about. And the older women who used to be cute young women in the 80s are now these old hags yelling at you about the environment all the time. It's tiresome. It sucks. And they don't like it. And they've lost that kind of cultural energy. And now people find the Greens kind of annoying. And to this comes another fact, which this is sort of an interesting sociological article I read about the sort of Greens represents elite views in German society. So they are the closest we have to an elite ideology. They are all the wealthiest people profess interest in green views. They are the party of the German elite, as close as we can have it. And this means that they're constantly lecturing all of society all the time because they feel entitled to do so. So they're telling, there's a whole running joke in Germany is all the things the Greens don't want you to do or have proposed forbidding. So someone has compiled a hugely amusing website. There are Greens who want to forbid first-class travel on airplanes, who want to ban domestic airlines, who want to forbid first-class cabins in trains, who want to stop backwards parking, who want to forbid wireless internet, who want to ban cell phones. It's down the list, all the things the Greens want to ban. And there's a party, and again, not all of them, but these are regional politicians and so forth, but they're always running around lecturing people, and it's just profoundly obnoxious. And this is called the kind of a school mom party now, and it's getting to the point where the press can't really run interference for them anymore because it's just so irritating. So they're always still portrayed as super cool by German state media and so forth, but it's not. It's you can see that they're having problems with their public support. It's a cultural shift. The energy has shifted away from the left because they are the establishment, and children, the youth, don't like that.
Eugyppus, thank you so much. I think we have done a full U-turn. Now we came back to German politics. I think it's probably a good moment to stop our conversation. It was absolutely fascinating. I'm very. Thank you. I'm very excited about the translation in French of that interview, and I hope you will get many more people to get to know you, and potentially a translation of your next book in French as well. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much, and we'll definitely stay in touch. I think I hope you will become a regular on that podcast because it was absolutely fascinating, and thank you again for your work.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to appear, and I hope to come back sometime soon.
The French invaders